Hello students, welcome to week 2 for COM 560 Communication Ethics. This week we are continuing our discussion into communication ethics and philosophy. If you look at the week 2 agenda, you can see we're reading chapters 3 and 5 in the course text. We're also reading a handout on axiology and a handout on teleology. You're watching 2 videos related to both philosophical branches. You're completing discussion board number 2, which has an original due date for your original post on Friday, and your reply posts are due on Sunday. And philosophical reflection number 2 is also due on Sunday. If you look at the discussion board, you'll know you'll be writing 400 words around the idea of considering a situation that required you to make a difficult choice. You'll be assessing the situation using 3 of the following approaches that you found within the reading: democratic, universal humanitarian, codes, procedures and standards, contextual, or narrative. So you'll pick 3 of them from the following approaches. You will also define dialogic ethics, explain the major tenets of this theory and this concept within ethics from what you found in the course reading. You'll provide an overview and analysis of how dialogic ethics fits within the situation described in the prompt. So you're that situation where you had to make that difficult choice, and you'll provide at least one scholarly source besides the textbook to support your assertions within your post. You'll post that no later than Friday and reply to at least 2 students no later than Sunday. Your philosophical reflection number 2 asks you to write approximately 3 pages in APA format utilizing 2 outside sources explaining the general ideas of teleology and axiology. In this description, you will provide in detail all of the tenets of the philosophical branches and how it relates to philosophy, and ethics. You'll also describe and explain the intersection and relationship of these ideas with communication ethics by providing examples of how they intersect and relate with each other. You'll determine if teleology and axiology intersect at any point in their philosophical positions by providing assertions to support your determination utilizing scholarly support. You will also find a scholarly paper that is a research study or it's a critical method that utilizes the philosophical branch described in the prompt this week, teleology and axiology. It does not have to directly relate to communication, but it's strongly encouraged. You'll also provide a reflection on how this study relates to the philosophical branches described in the paper. You'll use at least 2 outside sources for this paper, and it will be in complete APA format utilizing a cover page, abstract, and text citations and references. So essentially, you'll be providing an overview and a reflective essay that analyzes teleology and axiology. As we move through this, you'll see we have one more set of these philosophical reflections, and this is designed to help us with content later on in the course. I wanted to go over some communicative perspectives of axiology. It's important to know that axiology is the study of values, specifically ethics, aesthetics, and religion. One's value can be understood and must always be interpreted and criticized in light of one's worldview. Bach really makes this contention. Bach also tells us that no one has the right, rationally speaking, to say this is of value unless this person has related it to everything they know. Thus, value is related to one's reality, which is socially constructed out of one's ontological perspective. So axiology is directly influenced by ontology. Our perspective of reality and things of that nature provides an ontological perspective of what the study of values is to a person. So from this perspective, communication is a tool to share one's axiological perspective. Peters, a very noted communication philosopher, and reminds us that communication is an act of receiving, a transmission, and an exchange. So communication allows us the ability to share an axiological perspective with others, particularly to spread Christian values. So think about an instance where you may have utilized the study of values and some ontological perspectives to share Christianity with one another. It's important to know that expressions of Christian values through communication does not necessarily condemn a person or really communicate said values. It's really utilized as a perspective to discuss God's views or God's values in the world. It's important to know that Schulze, another noted Christian communication scholar, says that God has made us all to be creative symbolizers who can transform almost anything into communication. And axiology is just an example that demonstrates how communication utilizing a transmission model allows someone to share their faith with one another. So it's important to know as we keep this through that As we look at axiology, keep some of those things in mind. Know that we are looking at this perspective to show us that value is related to one's reality. So axiology is related to ontology and the social construction of that. So from this perspective, communication is a tool that allows one to share their axiological perspective with others. As we look at teleology, it's important to know that this particular idea of philosophy stresses the end result or consequences of one's actions. Specifically, teleology looks at extrinsic and intrinsic finality of actions. So you can see here in the example that extrinsic finality considers a thing or action that ends for the sake of something external to itself. So someone's desire to be happy for another person, a child or a spouse. An intrinsic finality considers a thing or action that ends for its own sake. One's desire to be happy for the sake of being happy, for myself. So think of it from that perspective. This perspective is influenced obviously by human perception. Thus, one's view of something with an extrinsic or intrinsic finality is dependent on their perception of the situation. So this is just saying that teleological perspectives can vary and be significantly different depending on the person. C.S. Lewis has a passage that discusses the meditation in the tool shed. It's a phenomenal piece where it talks about how we are looking at this light and what the light contains coming through this tool shed. And so if we look at this particular piece or look at some of Lewis's knowledge from a teleological perspective, we know that Lewis discusses how we can look along or at a beam of light in a tool shed and we'll have two different teleological results. In his passage of meditation in the tool shed, he shows us as we look at the light, we see many things. When we look through the light, we also see other things. So the result may be intrinsic or extrinsic. However, each result of looking along or looking at the beam provides some understanding, neither complete, of what he is seeing, but the story emphasizes this need to look at the beam because he's showing us the value of considering both intrinsic and extrinsic finalities. Many times the consequences of our action is a result of communication failure or communication illiteracy. Oftentimes many people have the inability to clearly communicate to one another. And it happens. There's communication breakdowns all the time. The problem with communication is that it's related to various meanings of words. What is right to one person may be different to another. Thus, the consequences of our actions may be a transmission error in communication and the need for more simplistic language, or we need to look at the teleological perspectives in communication and consider how we can gain perspective from looking at each other along a beam or at a beam. The language that we use in dialogue can influence the end results of our action. So it's really important to know that teleology is centered around this idea of extrinsic and intrinsic finality. I wanted you to keep that in mind as you go through some of the course content and see some of the things that we are working on this week. Like I mentioned, we're reading chapter 3 and 5 of the course text. We have an axiology and a teleology handout. We're also watching a video on each of those branches of philosophy. We are completing discussion board number 2, which is due Friday, with reply post due on Sunday, and philosophical reflection number 2 is also due on Sunday. I pray you all have a blessed week, and if you have any questions, let me know. I look forward to interacting with you. God